following discussion is for educational purposes only and is not intended to diagnose or treat any disease. Please do not apply any of this information without first speaking with your doctor.
What is up, everyone, and welcome to the Diabetic podcast, where we discuss how to take control of your health and gain the freedom to live the life that you deserve. I'm Garrett, and with me is my co-host, Dr. Grady and Dr, who is a board-certified chiropractic internist. And welcome back, everyone, to another episode of the Diabetic. But today is the first installment of Bottoms Up.
It's boxes up.
Oh, I'm literally thinking about. Well, there we go.
I know you are.
I'm thinking
You're
about
still
alcohol.
thinking about Friday. Get that shit out of your mind.
Well, the whole point of Boxes Up, everyone, is for Grady and I to be a little more casual, as he and I would normally talk to each other. And Boxes Up is obviously a play on words for like bottoms up and shooting the shit and being a little more vulgar, a little more real. And since we're diabetics, we don't drink very often. We have juice boxes.
Yeah.
Or maybe not, but besides the point. So what we're talking about today, though, is wrestling, folk style wrestling. Go on.
Yeah, I mean, grew up on wrestling and love it, and I still stay in touch with it. So, one of my favorite topics, one of my favorite sports.
So this is why this episode will be beneficial, because there's a blood sugar management in sports is hard, difficult, and unique to each sport.
Mm-hmm.
Wrestling as a sport is completely unique. There are other martial arts which you do now, right? You know, you do jujitsu. Are you still doing jujitsu right now? Is your gym open?
No, we're still on hiatus.
Gotcha. But up here in Wisconsin, I treat a couple of patients that do jujitsu, and their gyms are open, but very different. You know, it's very different protocols.
Mm-hmm.
But you know, cutting weight, the idea of cutting weight, being dehydrated, being a high school athlete, or maybe you're a college athlete or junior high, I think it's very difficult to balance that type of sport at those age groups and being diabetic.
Mm-hmm.
And that's something that both you and I actually share in common. So
yeah, you got, especially at that age, you got all these hormones flying around that makes it hard anyways, and then you throw something like wrestling that's very extreme in many different ways, and becomes really hard to control your blood sugar.
Well, I was actually a late bloomer, so I'm not sure about for me if those hormones are flying around or not. But so I almost want to open up with this, in that it's really easy to be a diabetic and try to hack your way through things.
Yeah.
You know. And so what I used to do, which I don't recommend anyone to do, I'm sharing this as a failure of myself and anyone else to maybe catch me doing this. But to cut weight, what I would do, which my parents weren't super big about me cutting weight anyways. They didn't want me cutting a whole lot of weight like some wrestlers in high school do.
Yep.
And so, but I still eventually, especially my junior, senior year, when I kind of thickened out a little bit, I got closer to my weight class. And so to cut weight, I would purposefully almost put myself through diabetic ketoacidosis. All my friends and teammates would be eating cheeseburgers and they would be wanting to eat cheeseburgers and wanting to eat pizza. And I would say, I can do that. And I would eat the cheeseburgers and I would eat the pizza. And then I would just take my pump off and I would just say, see ya, insulin. And I know, looking back, it's cringeworthy to say out loud, but
if you think about it, it's really the perfect system, because it makes your blood sugar high, but it also makes you pee out this whole thing. So it's like, it's just built in to make you lose weight. So it's great.
Well, that's what my thought was when I was going through it all. I think I literally could lose 9 pounds in a day.
Holy cow.
without like the crazy gym bat or trash bags over me with
Yeah.
10 layers of sweats and like
Without the
running.
misery and all the plus side because you're eating all these great foods.
That's right. Yeah, exactly. We got to eat the ice cream and then I got to gloat that I could eat where everyone else like barely had a chicken breast, for lunch. So um so I would do stupid and crazy stuff like that. And it would definitely, I didn't realize it would affect me because it was just part of living with diabetes. It was part of, oh, blood sugar is high, let me correct it. Oh, blood sugar is low. I wasn't thinking about how the flow of my blood sugar affects my overall body, affects my performance.
Yeah.
But it's such a crazy thing to do, just hearing about it, and it makes me want to rip my eyes out.
Yep. Yeah. Cause I mean, as a teenager, as a kid, or as a college athlete, even you're not necessarily focused on like your performance. Like you are, but you aren't. Like you're focused on the end result, but at the same time, you're not necessarily focusing on how you're feeling and how you're functioning. And so when you really start looking at it, or you start having other people look at it for you, like with my parents, um, they would notice that when my blood sugar was really good, man, I wrestled at a pretty high level. When my blood sugar was really high, it was like a whole different person. My dad's like, it literally looks like you're out there in cement, like you're just in slow motion. And because I mean, I wrestled these guys that literally I had pinned the week before,
Mm-hmm.
and then this week I lost to him, and I'm like, how is this even possible? Like, sometimes that happens because you catch somebody and they really
Right.
are decently good, but you just
Yeah.
caught them.
Right.
But then it wasn't that way. Like I dominated the whole match, pinned him, and like this kid is just not good. And then the next week he comes in and beats me, and it's like a close, quote unquote good match. And so after that match, I'm like, this is like what happened? Like I'm so
Mm-hmm.
frustrated. And then my dad would tell me, you just look like you're in slow motion. So then we check my blood sugar and it's like, well above 200. And we're like, oh, so we started noticing that trend. And so getting back to my point, it's like, you're not necessarily focused on how you feel. You're focused on the end result. So like in your case, it's like, all I care about is making weight so I can wrestle. And
Mm-hmm.
I want to make weight in the most comfortable way, which is being able to eat whatever I want
Right.
and still making weight. And so all your focus is on that and not necessarily on how you're feeling and how you're functioning.
Yeah. Yeah, no, that's a good point. Yeah, just what am I trying to get to? Um, and just figuring out a way to do that. And that's really awesome that your parents had that insight. Because actually, when you told me that story for the first time, I got pissed. I got fucking pissed. And yeah, I'm gonna swear on since it's a little more off the hinges. Um, but just because I never thought about it. I never thought about my blood sugar affecting me that way. And I wasn't the best wrestler by any means. I was captain, I was varsity for a couple years, got lettered and all that. But the thought of now, as the glory days are kicking in and thinking about what could have happened. Oh, just like people like, oh, I could have made it into the league if I didn't
Yeah.
sprain that ankle. And when I was a junior in high school for football. um, so kind of in the same thought process, it was just like, man, how much more could I have done better if I even realized that my blood sugar affects performance?
Mm-hmm.
And that's just like, once when you told me those, started telling me some of these stories, I was just like, that's insane. Like, did you ever have a rival? Did you have a rival that happened with?
Yeah. Well, nah, I can't say a rival because, like I
No.
said, for the most part, you really notice it with like the kids that shouldn't stand a chance, but then they
Mm-hmm.
do. But it's happened a couple times with like people who I wrestled multiple times, and so like the first time I wrestled them, I'm thinking of one kid specifically. I pinned him in like the first period. Then the next time we wrestle, I like it's a close match. I still win, but it's a close match. And I'm like, what the heck is going on here? And then, we wrestle more and more. And then I remember specifically this one match that it was like the only tournament that my dad had missed because he had gout really bad and literally could not get out of bed.
Mm.
And um, I wrestled this kid, just not a good wrestler, and he beats me, and I'm just so frustrated. I go up and check my blood sugar, and it's like 280. Like I can still picture. I believe it was 286. I can still picture it in my head because it just burned into me.
Mm.
And I'm like, I mean, not to use. It's hard. It's like you don't want to use that as an excuse, but at
Oh,
the same
sure.
time, it's like, man, that it has a big effect.
It's almost like the reverse, like how I think about it, like, oh, what could have been. You're thinking
Yeah,
about like, oh man, like where I literally have this unknown potential in my mind of the past. So like, man, I could only go skies like better. Because if I'm wrestling sluggish all the time, my blood sugar was awful during wrestling.
yeah,
And if it was awful all the time, the thought is in my mind, wow, it could have been so much better.
yeah,
But for you, and like it's almost an exciting and frustrating thought. But when you're thinking about it, it's almost literally this frustrating thing of am I making an excuse because I didn't do well because of my athletic performance, or did I not do well because of my blood sugar?
yeah, yeah. There's always going to be that question mark. It's like, especially when you have people notice the change. So it's like a noticeable enough change that happens with the high blood sugar, and so it's like, well, if it's that noticeable, it's like it has to be a pretty big factor then. And so then it then becomes sort of a mind game after the fact, being like, okay, was it the fact that I just didn't show up today and didn't wrestle well,
You
or
sucked.
yeah, was it because I sucked today,
Mm-hmm.
or is it because my blood sugar was high and I could have done better if I would have just controlled that, and things could have been a lot different. And then like when I hear you talk about your control, it also makes me think about just like even within practice, like how much better could you have done because you were able to practice better, push yourself harder, all those things.
Yep.
Because when your blood sugar is high, you're just not going to perform well, whether it's just because of you you're in sand or you're moving slow, but at the same time how hard you're able to push yourself. And yeah, so I there's a lot of stuff to think about.
And you thinking about pushing myself in practice back in the day too. This was a reflection of my personality, or the character I'd yet to develop at that point in my life. Wrestling, for many, many reasons, helped shaped my character moving forward. But there were still things at those moments that weren't the best about my character.
Yeah,
Things like white lying and trying to cut corners, and doing these types of things. And I never, for most part of my life, I've never tried to use diabetes as an excuse for anything. But there's this one distinct moment when I think it was senior year. Man, I was just getting beat up. I'm sure my blood sugar was like super high, and the coaches were mad about the whole performance of the room not doing well and us not getting after it. And after freaking swear, the guy swears or whatever, we just get up on the line. We start doing sprint drills, right? And I'm just like, oh, I just kind of start acting like I'm huffing and puffing more so than just from sprinting, and I just go check my blood sugar, and I'm pretty sure it's like not that bad. Pretty sure it's like 130 or something
yeah.
like that. After like 2 hours of practice, and for whatever reason, I had a can of Coke for like my low blood sugar, and so I'm like, fuck this. I don't want to sprint anymore. It's like 2 hours into this practice. It's like 6 o'clock, 5 o'clock at night for a high school student after being at school all day. And I just stand on the side and crack open a can of Coke. And I start just drinking that thing. I try not to smirk as like I'm on the side and my friends are literally sprinting away from me, turning around and sprinting towards me. And one of my best buddies, who I was always my wrestling partner, or most of the time was, he's like, he knew he, and I never admitted it until like, recently, that when I talked to him, that that I totally got out of sprints once by acting like I had low blood sugar,
Yeah.
which I'm not proud of. But at the same time, you know, it's I don't know. I almost even have mixed feelings about doing something like that because diabetes is hard as it is.
Yeah.
But what level do you have personal responsibility just over everything, and then trying to get out of things, and then I mean, push comes to shove, shouldn't have lied and
Yeah.
should have just got back on and started sprinting because I definitely was not low and I was not dropping low.
Yeah. Yeah. Like I think about that a lot because as a wrestler myself going through practice, I never used diabetes as an excuse because I knew that would be the first thing somebody would think about when when I tried to get out of something that was hard. And so I always only checked it when I legitimately thought there was something wrong with my blood sugar. It wasn't like every time I checked my blood sugar, it wasn't always bad, but sometimes you still have those feelings. You're like, I think I'm getting low. Let's check it.
Sure.
And for the most part, I always tried to do it like in breaks or in transitions. But there's times where it's like we're doing live and man, I just can't go another round because I might pass out. But yeah, it was always like I always had that in the back of my mind of like every time I went, even though it was legitimate, I'm like, they probably think I'm just being lazy and and trying to get out of something. And so it never really crossed my mind to do it on purpose because I already felt guilty about going and check my blood sugar while everybody was still working. And at the same time, it's like, I still wanted to be better. And I also wanted to be for the in my later years, I want to be a team leader. So I didn't want to be constantly going out.
Right.
Um, I just didn't want to be that guy. Like I don't want to be that guy that's constantly faking, whether it's faking blood sugar, or faking injuries, or things like that. I didn't want to be that guy that was um, copping out, and so like it's been interesting getting into coaching after graduating because
Oh, because you're a wrestling coach. Yeah.
yeah, so after I graduated high school, I went and played football for a year and then came back home and started coaching the high school back home. And my we had a few type ones in and out, never really anyone consistent.
Oh yeah. Because
But
I remember you telling me about this when we were living together, and I wanted to. I was like, did you connect with him? Like, did you like how cool would it have been? Like, I remember you telling me this, and I'll let you finish your story in a second. But I remember not because now when I work with diabetics, like I'm so like eager. I gotta play it cool. Like if I was dating, right? Gotta play it cool. But like I so want to be there for other diabetics and be a mentor. And so to think that, oh man, how cool would have been to have a coach that was a type 1 diabetic. I remember like pouncing on you, like, oh, did you like connect with him? Does he talk to you about this X, Y, Z? And I remember you're just like, no.
yeah, yeah, I have mixed feelings about it because it's like on one side, I want to be able to relate to them, help them through their struggles. Like I legitimately want to do that. But at the same time, I always have that in the back of my head of when I was going through wrestling, like what I just said, my intention of not faking any of those lows. But I
Right.
know like it's so common for kids to fake stuff to get out of things. And so that's almost more on the forefront of my mind versus helping somebody. It's not necessarily that I wouldn't help somebody. It's just like constantly trying to really analyze the situation. Be like, okay, is this legitimate or are they just trying to get out of this? And but more so at the same time, most of the type ones that I coached, either I really didn't coach them because like when I was in Missouri coaching, we had I think like one diabetic that was on the team, but he was a freshman, and so he wasn't even in our room because they split up the varsity, junior varsity, and then freshmen were in a different room. So I didn't even really get to interact with him at all. And at the same time, I don't think he lasted very long. He wasn't the wrestling type. We'll just put it that way. But
You mean he was soft?
very much so.
We're supposed to be not PC on this episode.
Yeah, he was very soft. And so that's, I mean, and that's almost another reason why I didn't really connect with him, is because you could just see the fact that, and that's also why it was on the forefront of my mind. I'm like, this kid, you can just tell by his mannerisms, the way he's carrying himself, and just like the way he just moves through practice. He's gonna be a faker, and he ended up turning out to be a faker because he would fake injuries all the time, and that stuff just annoys the hell out of me, and it bothers me so much that I just
Burst your
can't
beta
stand it.
cells.
It bursts my beta cells, and I can't get over it. Like if somebody does that, I'm like, I can't even look at you. And so yeah, that wasn't a good right experience. I haven't had like very many um wrestlers that I've coached that I don't think none of them come to mind really that have um have really needed my help or wanted my help, or um that have, like, that's literally the only kid I can think of at this point. There was one other one that was he was a wrestler, but I think by the time I got to coach, I don't think he was wrestling anymore, because I say that because he was a student at my high school, and he was decently younger than me. So by the time I came back to coach, he would have still been there, but I don't think he was wrestling anymore. So I haven't gotten a lot of chances to actually coach type ones, to be on the other end of things. But that's always on the forefront of my mind, is like, all right, we, it's, I want to help you, but at the same time, don't take advantage of me. Don't take advantage of the other coaches, because the other coaches don't really know anything about type 1 diabetes. Like,
Yeah.
nobody knows anything about type 1 diabetes unless they have it, or
Yeah.
they are really close with somebody who does have it. And even then, you, they don't really get a good sense of, okay, this person is low, or they're just trying to take advantage of you. They just freak
Right.
out and say, okay, they know that this is really important and can be really serious. And so they don't want to even mess with it. And so they're just like, yeah, go ahead and check your blood sugar or whatnot.
Right.
Um, so yeah, so it's just an interesting situation. I'm kind of glad I didn't have a lot of type 1 diabetics, just because I would have been so in my head about, all right, is this person just faking it, or
Well, you would have found a flow. Like if you had somehow a wrestling team full of type 1 diabetics. I can't even imagine what that would be like. Everyone with their pumps swinging around.
Yeah.
Uh, but I'm sure you'd find a balance of
Yeah.
how to approach the situations. But you saying those things, that also makes me almost a different side tangent of wrestling, is even our fellow healthcare practitioners, and those even in the nutrition or functional medicine space or natural healthcare, on top of the typical regular allopathic and typical medical model. To me, unless you're type 1, and this is more me reflecting on my natural healthcare fellow practitioners, you don't talk about type 1.
Yeah.
Like when I hear other practitioners talking about beta cell regeneration, or I hear them talking about like supplements or anything and everything else, it's like, this is, yes, those things have a role, but if you're not managing your insulin and your carbs and how you're doing anything and everything else, none of it matters. And,
Yeah.
and unless you're type 1, you have no idea of really how to comprehend any of this stuff. And this is part of why this podcast, because it's, unless you're a diabetic, you really don't know what these things feel like and act like. Yeah. And once I started talking to you about wrestling and type 1 diabetes, I was like, holy cow, like there's just so much different than I thought it was going through by myself. But no other person would have been able to coach me through that.
Yeah. No one would have been able to get through to you about it,
Mm-hmm.
because it's just like, well, you don't know how it feels. So, and
That's
whether
part of it
it's
too.
legitimate advice or not, it's like, well, how much does this person really know what's going on?
Mm-hmm.
Because they don't.
Yeah.
They don't know how it feels to be low. Well, they may know how it feels to be low, but definitely probably not high.
Mm-hmm.
And just the struggles of trying to control those lows and highs all the time. Um, and therefore it's just hard to relate.
I remember I had an endo in the interim. I forgot what I was happening. Maybe because I was. I mean, it's always a weird time when you're a teenager because technically you're still pediatrics,
Yeah.
right? And
I was going
it's
to a pediatric endocrinologist till I was over 21 years old.
what?
Yeah.
Why? Oh, just because you didn't want to get a new one?
I'm just stubborn. I don't like change. So I just kept
Oh,
going to the same guy and he just kept
fair enough.
taking me. So
And then he's like, and then you're sitting there with like dinosaur stool on your feet, and your endo goes probably something like, Grady should probably not be here.
yeah, literally, I think the last time, this is so funny. The last appointment I think I had with him, I mean, I'm like surrounded by kid stuff. There's cartoons on the TV. I'm sitting in the waiting room, and this is when I had my giant beard. I have this giant beard that's like seven
You were a
inches long.
heavyweight at the time too, right?
Yeah, I was a
Weren't you a
big
big
guy
dude?
too. Yeah.
A
So
260 or something like that?
yeah, so like yeah, I think at that point I had started losing weight. So I was probably, I mean, like 240, 26 or
A
230.
big guy. Anyways.
Yeah, so big. I had this huge beard,
Mm-hmm.
and I think at that point he's like, "Yeah, I think it's probably time we find a actual doctor."
You could be
Good
how many
one.
of these people's fathers?
Yeah, no kidding.
Oh man. But I remember being at the pediatrician endocrinologist, and I forgot, maybe we were transitioning, or maybe it was something with healthcare insurance, or I don't know why, but I had a new endocrinologist. She was trying to help me solve my blood sugar issues. And as a kid, part of it, what you said, no one can relate. So like, you don't want to listen to advice. Like, man, my parents, when I was a teenager, I wasn't a big rebellion in terms of just being a teenager. Like, I listened to my parents. Like, I followed curfew, all that kind of stuff. And when it came to my diabetes, I I flicked the middle finger and I was like, screw you, hardcore, to anyone trying to tell me otherwise.
Hmm.
And so my blood sugar was all over the place, all the time, not just during wrestling. And I remember this endocrinologist was trying to help brainstorm, and it was very clear because wrestling is interesting that you really can't wrestle with a pump on,
Yeah.
and right, and because it should be at practice for anyone who's not a wrestler, which I would imagine majority of people aren't who are listening to this. You have your wrestling singlet, and
Hmm.
the leotard, as some might call it, but that's really only for the meets and your
Yeah.
actual matches. But then when you're wrestling in practice, it's kind of tighter fitting clothing or gym clothing or Under Armour or basketball shorts, but you don't want things flying around. Like,
Yeah.
it's so you don't want things to grab onto. So most people, like, I never wrestle with my pump on, obviously, and this is like 2 hours, 2.5, 3 hours where you don't, or I don't have my pump on, and she was just trying so hard. She's like, "Well, can you bolus beforehand?" And I was like, "Well, no, I would drop low."
Yeah.
But you spike so high because both the time duration without insulin, as well as the adrenaline and the cortisol, kind of like how we talk about sometimes with weightlifting, and the rebound effect with running that we've talked about before too. Once you start getting that stress response to that exercise, you're gonna get higher blood sugar too. And she just, for the life of her, couldn't figure out a way to uh, to help me through those times, and never we never at the time figured out a way, which I would now tell myself otherwise. There's some different strategies, but
Yeah.
I remember that being such a hard part of the practice portion for myself and blood sugar management, on top of all the wrestling other BS stuff that was going on. um it was just like, I don't know how to do this.
Yeah. Yeah. It's like you can't, as much as you want to wear your pump. Like I would wear my pump when I was coaching, and then like eventually there'd be a kid that would need a partner or maybe even go live. And I mean, at that point, like I'm a grown man wrestling with kids. Like I can control the situation
As
pretty.
a coach,
Yeah.
to frame it again.
Yeah. And I can control the situation well enough to where I'm not going to land and smash on my pump. Um, but like when you're wrestling, when you're the wrestler, like you rarely have control, like full control over how you're going to land somewhere or what the other person's doing. And so your pump can get smashed like that. And obviously that's an expensive piece of equipment and your lifeline. So you don't want that to happen. So yeah, it becomes a very hard, like if you're on the pump, it becomes a very hard kind of conundrum to go through. And I think going through it, it's just a learning experience. Again, like we talk about all the time, it's just like collecting the data and then trying to use that data to figure out what would be the best way to make this curve more flat. And like I think I did that um over a long period of time, but like back then I was much more reactive than I am now, where
Yes.
now I think through things a lot more thoroughly. I have a much clearer picture on how things are going to affect me and insulin dosing and timing of it. Whereas back in high school, it was just very reactive. Like, okay,
Yes.
I'm high, and I have like a short-sighted, okay, this is going to drop me low. So I might take my pump off a little early or drink something or whatever it is. But I think even then I began to understand some strategies that I could do. Because there's a couple things that you notice right away. Obviously, going through practice, you're going to drop low for the most part, most of the time. And so whether you're preemptively doing that because you're starting at that borderline low, you're like, well, I know I'm going to drop, so let's just drink one now so I don't have to stop in the middle of practice. And then at the same time, realizing that afterwards you're going to start to spike high. And so I think I began to notice some of those things. I don't think it was the um, perfect way of handling the situation. Like I think I was still very much reactive. Having know what I know now, I think what I would do is whatever my blood sugar was beforehand, correct accordingly. So if it's high, maybe just don't take any insulin and let the practice bring it down. If it's good, then maybe drink a little bit of juice. But then most importantly, like within that practice, if there's a break or a transition that's long enough, just having my pump on the side of the mat because it's just quick and easy. Run over there like the coach is demonstrating a move. Well, and it's like halfway or midway through practice. And I know, all right, this is typically when my blood sugar is going to start to rise. Okay, maybe I'll take a little bit of insulin there and mess with that. And then, but for sure, this is what I do even at the time after practice. Take a little bit of insulin because by then your blood sugar is really going to start to increase. And that's kind of what I've done with jujitsu is when I'm done with the class part of it, I'll check it and maybe take a little bit of insulin while we have that break. That way, when I get done with the live portion or the sparring portion, I'm not going to be just like 300 and just dying. Um, and but then at the same time, I think for when I started wrestling or when I was doing sports, my doctor, and this was my general practitioner, wasn't necessarily the endocrinologist, she was really worried about the blood sugars at night after having a practice
Okay.
at night. So she was really worried about me dropping low in the middle of the night when I was sleeping after having a practice at ending at 6:30 or 6, and which is a legitimate concern, especially when you are first starting that sport, because
Yeah.
you go from a state of not wrestling or not moving very much. You can't really mimic wrestling. Like that's a pretty intense cardiovascular
Right.
task, and both muscular and just endurance wise. And so, you're probably going to drop low in the middle of the night on those first couple nights unless you compensate with your basal. And ultimately
How
you
many people
don't.
don't know how to do that?
Yeah, and ultimately you don't know how much to compensate for that, so you're probably going to drop low anyways.
Yeah.
And so but knowing that going into it, I think is really important, because if you're a parent or you are a high school wrestler that lives with their parents, then you can say, okay, mom, can you wake me up at 12 so I can check my blood sugar, or even just set an alarm for yourself, and check it and see where it's at. Or if you have a CGM, obviously that's really nice. And And knowing that just going into it is really helpful, because then okay, I'm going to compensate for it and see what this compensation, if it works, if it doesn't work, and adjust based off of that. Um, and because that would happen to me, like especially early on, we have a really hard practice, and my blood sugar would be really, really great all the way through after eating supper and everything, and then I'd crash at night.
I can't I can't recall. I'm sure I had plenty of crashes at night, but I can't recall a whole lot of crashing at night. I didn't even have the awareness to think about patterns as a wrestling diabetic teenager. Like you said, I was so reactive, but I was only reactive. That was the only thing I knew was reactivity,
Yeah,
because I bought into I can eat whatever I want. I just need insulin. Like, as much as that is true, just you're gonna pay for that if that's really how you live and move through it. Like,
yeah,
yeah, sure, I can eat anything and everything, but if you don't know how to handle it, man, you're gonna be crashing and burning, highs and lows, and
yeah. It's gonna be a nightmare.
yeah. And so I can't remember a lot of lows at night, but that is a legitimate concern. Absolutely. I think, how would you go about, if, because I know how I would change things for myself. How would you go? Would it be just testing more? Is that what you're saying? Testing more and finding the patterns better, like how you would now? Is that the biggest thing? Like, if you told a younger Grady that was at 16 years old wrestling, how would you better coach him in managing their diabetes?
Yeah, I think one would be, I think having a CGM would be really helpful.
Now, does
Um,
your CGM when you do jujitsu get ripped off?
it does. So does my pump site.
Okay.
Um, Not always though. I mean, but it happens. It happens fairly regularly, but not so much to where it's like every single time.
Mm-hmm.
And so I think wearing a CGM as much as you can, just to get, and it doesn't have to be all season long, but to be able to establish a pattern and to be able to establish a habit that works for you. And so that could be a week time, it could be a couple weeks, whatever that is for you, but to be able to establish a routine that works pretty well for you. Ultimately, no practice is the same, no day is the same.
True.
And so there's always going to be some weird thing that gets thrown at you. Your blood sugar is higher than normal. It doesn't make any sense, and that's just the way it is. But at the same time, you can recognize patterns to make it a little bit more consistently. And so I think having that CGM would be really helpful. Back then, they may have had CGMs, but if they did, it was not great technology.
No, it wasn't like how it is now.
Yeah.
But I think what I would, yeah, I mean, so then, well, let me share my thing and then I'll ask you a follow-up question to that. I think the biggest thing I would do is I would experiment as advice to myself, or as a future parent, maybe of a son or daughter wrestling, or if I was even an endocrinologist, which I'm not, and I don't prescribe insulin. But I would experiment with medium lasting insulin,
Yeah.
and I would do a 6 hour insulin and before practice, and I would lower my basal rate on my pump so it doesn't overlap, and that way it was a steady flow of it into practice. So that way there's always something there, because I think the biggest thing too is why when I run right now, I try to never just take off my pump, because yes, insulin allows GLUT4 translocation and skeletal muscle and cardiac muscle and adipose tissue, and to that is what it does. But there's so much more than that.
Yeah.
It's needed for almost every tissue, and it can be signaling in whether it be something like epigenetics or brain tissue or clearing out debris. And to have no insulin during the time for overall body function is not good. So when I run, I try to never just take my pump off, but sometimes I do. So I would try to have some kind of medium acting insulin go into it, but then you compensate with then you're, instead of just fighting the highs and lows and the reactivity of that, you'd almost assume you're probably going to be more low than high in that case. And then you find, then you really, really stress glucose tabs or low ounce, because this is to wrestling in particular, low weight, low ounce actual physical weight of food that increases glucose the most. Like a can of Coke is not a good low blood sugar treatment for a wrestler because of because the fluid in it, right?
Yeah,
You're
the
gonna get rid of fluid.
carbonation, that would just be awful. You burping up all that stuff while you're running sprints.
I used to eat weird ass stuff. My parents had no idea how to be a parent of a wrestler. I would have like egg and cheese and ketchup sandwiches after my weigh-ins for like tournaments on Saturdays, and I would be drinking milk.
Oh my
and,
gosh.
and I remember one of my coaches for a little while, he used to call me Pancake instead of Pano.
Yeah.
And Joe, it didn't catch on to anyone else, but he'd be like, Pancake, why are you eating milk? Like, why are you having dairy? That's an awful idea before you wrestle.
Yeah.
So anyways, I think if you have some kind of insulin and insulin management strategy where then you're only fighting lows, because that way the performance, but the lows are dangerous too. I don't know. I'm more risk adverse with lows than the chronicity of highs.
Yeah.
But that's starting to change as I'm learning more and more about long-term effects about hypoglycemia. But that's besides the point. So that'd be my biggest thing to like tell myself. I'd like try to figure out this, because if I were to try to do something like a triathlon where I'm in the water and don't have my pump, I would try to figure that out. Or like an Ironman or a half Ironman, something like that. I feel like that's huge, would be an interesting way of going about it.
Yeah.
And that's what I would look into personally.
Yeah. I mean, it's a really hard, complex situation because just looking at the practice aspect of things, I think if you're just practicing, I think it'd probably be almost better to just do shots and do long acting insulin and shots, because one, you are, I mean, for the most part, most of the wrestlers are going to be cutting weight, and so they're not
Right.
eating a ton anyways, and so
Mm-hmm.
it's easy just to give a shot for your bolus and be on your way, versus having the pump and not having that insulin during your workouts. And but then at the same time, things change totally when you go into competition day. Like competition day, it's just a roller coaster of blood sugars, because you have points like when you're warming up in the morning where it's probably going to start dropping, but then you have your first match and your adrenaline's high, it spikes and your blood sugar spikes. And then you wrestle, you burn off a bunch of glucose, and you may drop low, and then
You're
you're
sitting around for
waiting
4 hours.
forever, and then you have
Yeah.
another match. It's just like you can't handle that with just you can, but it'd just be really hard. You'd be taking lots of shots if you were handling that with just shots. But then at the same time with the pump, the practice aspect of things is not ideal. So I think ultimately it comes down to what do you prefer and what can you dial in the most. For some people, that's going to be shots. For some people, that's going to be the pump. Um, and I don't know. I think, like I said, if it was just a practice side of things, like for me right now, basically that's jujitsu. Like it's just a practice thing. It's not like I'm going to. I did go to one or two competitions, but besides that, it was just basically it's just practice. And so looking at that, it's like, well, it's probably more beneficial just to do shots and do long acting insulin. Whereas like if you're going to be doing regular competitions like every week, like you are as a wrestler, well, now it becomes a little bit harder of a decision. Like, pump gives me a lot of control and that quick control. Whereas shots, it's like, yeah, you have that quick control with your Novolog or Humalog shots, but at the same time, it's like how many shots do you really want to give yourself in a day?
Right. So do you think then for practices, you would go back and you would actually, because you were saying you didn't want to go and test often, right?
It
And
wasn't
we
that
always,
necessarily that I wouldn't want to test. Yeah, I mean, I wouldn't want to test often. It would just be like more structured testing. And I think going back, I would also try and put my checker in the room because before I'd put it in the locker room, and so I'd have to run to the locker room where it was like literally across the hall, so it wasn't like it was real far.
oh, okay.
But at the same time, I would I would put it in the room so I could just hop over there and check it while the coach is going over something or whatever it is, just so I could check it more often. Because like I said back then, I'm more reactive, so it's like, oh, I'll just go into my locker and check it when I'm low.
Sure. Mine, yeah. My when you said that, I instantly, of course, didn't think about
Think
what
to
your
years,
situation.
yeah.
Yeah, I was like, why would you do that? That's super dumb.
It's so far away. What the?
Yeah, because my wrestling room was on a second floor, and you had to go down the stairs, across the hallway, and the same kind of thing, down another set of stairs to the basement. And then you would turn left, and then it's like you're in the locker room,
Yeah.
and it's like in a moldy basement. Great for all the functional things.
Yeah.
But so I always had like a bag on the side of wherever I wrestled at, and I brought a bag. That's where my wrestling shoes were, and just plopped it there. So yeah, that makes sense. But do you have any kind of crazy wrestling and pump malfunction, or wrestling and low blood sugar stories, or anything like that?
Um, I mean, obviously, I've had my pump ripped out several times. Like
Yeah,
people literally grab it and rip it out.
like on purpose.
I don't know if it's on purpose necessarily, but like I don't know if
Mine,
it's just like just like a gut reaction when you feel something on somebody, you just rip it out.
I
um,
don't think that happened. Like it got ripped out, but that was because I was like rolling around or a sprawl and was on my
yeah.
stomach, and then just a trauma, and that would always hurt like a motherfucker.
Oh
Like,
yeah. You
yeah,
land
like,
right on that plastic. Yeah.
mm-hmm, mm-hmm. But so go on. I was interrupting. Any?
Um, I had one in my head before, but now I can't remember it.
Well, you brainstorm. So that it was my freshman year, and I think this is the one and only time I wrestled varsity my freshman year, and it was at a tournament, and it was at a quad tournament, and this was in DeKalb, Illinois, the home of the barbs. DeKalb, Illinois invented barbed wire,
Oh.
and so their mascot was literally a barbed wire, but somehow it translated to a turkey. I don't know how that worked, but and my parents just left. I didn't have extra pump supplies because in reality, I only started like moving through life now where I have two extra sets of like insertion sets and reservoirs and insulin on me, because now that I'm, I don't want to work 20-30 minutes away and have to drive home in case something happens. Like,
Yeah.
so I didn't have a lot. I don't think I had any extra pump supplies with me. So my parents leave. They're starting to drive, they're probably like 20-30 minutes away. It's like a middle of a snowstorm. They can't turn back, or I don't know they had to, but they were slow to get home and then turn around. I can't remember all the details. It's so long ago. But my pump, literally, the Medtronic tubing snapped somehow.
Oh wow.
And it's hard to break that
Yeah,
tubing.
that just stretches out on me.
Yeah, and I remember that being like one of the selling points as a kid. At 13 years old, 14 years old, whenever I was on the pump at first, I'm like, see, you can take scissors and you can't cut it. Like it just goes on and on. It's like
Gotcha.
taffy. Yeah. And so it literally like ripped. And I was like, I don't know what to do. And my head coach, the varsity coach, was a AP biology teacher. So he actually he knew a little bit about metabolism. He
Yeah.
wasn't a professor of anything, but I mean, he knew some stuff, and he knew, he's like, well, I know if you run, it'll lower your blood sugar. And so I think it was done for wrestling, and so for like, it'll be like an hour and a half, because I guess we had more than 2 hours left in the meet, and then I wasn't wrestling anymore or something. I was just running in a hallway for an hour. He just made me. He was like, just run and don't stop. And he made like the seniors, like two seniors, like keep company, and just like I would just go back and forth, and it didn't even seem like a long time, an hour and a half. But just running in this one hallway for an hour and a half because literally the tubing broke. Um, and I think I was like perfect at the end of it. And I was like, oh, I guess I don't need insulin anymore. Once my parents got there, like an hour and a half later, and came back with a fresh everything. And then we ended up just leaving at the same time as my parents left. So they're like, probably like, what the hell?
Yeah.
Like, why do we drive all this way? His blood sugar was fine. So but that's just one of the things as an athlete, as a diabetic, especially as a high school athlete or junior high or a college athlete, that you run into situations like that and you don't really know necessarily what to do.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, it's always really tough because I mean that's why I think for the most part most type 1 diabetics are just like in that mindset of always being prepared because you really get screwed over sometimes and it's like, all right, I better not do that again. Let's try and learn from this and get better.
Right.
So it's just like you learn to just always have a lot of stuff around so you don't have to deal with that again. Cause like I'm sure you don't want to have to run forever again just to keep your blood sugar down. And yeah, so you just have to adapt and overcome and we all go through that. We all make mistakes and don't pack enough and then or don't even think about it and then all of a sudden something happens, something gets ripped off or the cord breaks somehow and then you got to deal with it.
Mm-hmm. So this is the ego driven part of this episode now. Maybe a little chance to brag. How good at you were you at wrestling? Tell us your
Um,
stats.
I don't know. It always makes me depressed because I I mean I was decently good. I was decently good, but I could have been way better. Like after graduating and now going back and coaching, like one of the things that still bothers me is that um like my last year was the last year that my coach was there, so he retired after that. And the new coaching staff that came in had like all these national champion coaches, like they had Division 2 national championships,
Oh wow.
and they all came in and wrestled with the kids and just made everybody better. And that, I mean, coming back, it really kind of bummed me out because I'm like, man, if I would have had this, I would have been a lot better. It wasn't necessarily that the coaches that I had were bad. It was more so I didn't feel like I had somebody to push me, like in the practice room, like a partner to push me. Like I had all I did was the only one that could really somewhat push me was the heavyweight, but he was 2 years younger than me, and he was also like maxed out heavyweight. Like he had to cut weight to make heavyweight. So it's
Oh
like
wow. That's a big boy.
there's only so much I can do of like my actual game on him because just I mean it's just so hard to move him, and it's like well 220-pounder, yeah, they're harder to move, but at the same time you still have to be able to move and you still need to be able to do your moves on them. So it's like I didn't get a whole lot of practice doing moves that were better for my weight class, and so that's always a frustrating thing for me. It's like thinking back and thinking how much better I could have been if I just would have had somebody there to push me harder than I pushed myself.
Right.
Um, but having said that, that was pretty darn good. No, I mean, I I finally made varsity my junior year, and then made went to state both years. Last year, I mean, I kind of tanked it at state. Like should have placed pretty high, but ended up losing in the heartbreak round with 10 seconds left. Yeah, so it was kind of crazy. 10 seconds left. I'm down.
Wow. I'm
Like
surprised you remember this whole story. All right. Say it
I'm
again.
down. I'm down by like 1 point or something. So I have to take him down. And so I me as a wrestler in high school, it's different now, but in high school, I never really shot that much. Like I was very much a defensive wrestler.
Mm-hmm.
And but I could have been, but again, that comes back to practice room, but whatever. So I'm down 10 seconds left. I have to get a takedown. And so I'm like, all right, screw it. Let's take him down. So I shoot in. It was like the easiest thing ever. I shoot in, take him down like it's nothing. And then instead of covering his ankle or grabbing his ankle when I came around, I went around his waist and then he just rolled me right. He hooked my arm and just rolled me right through
Yep.
and lost it right there. Bummer. Just a bummer. Like,
And that.
especially in the heartbreak round, like, and
Mhm.
we always had a ton of fans. And so, when I took him down, everybody's just going crazy. And then
Were
boom,
you
bull rolls me through, and it's just like, oh my gosh. I
were
still
you the
haven't
underdog?
I still haven't rewatched the match.
You still haven't
No.
rewatched the match. It's been like almost a decade,
I
Grady.
can't handle it, okay? Every time I go to state wrestling, it just depresses me because I just think about that.
That's too funny. Were you the underdog?
um, I don't think so.
Hmm.
But he ended up getting third. So if I'm gonna lose to somebody, it's gonna be that guy. And then the next year, I think he won state. But yeah, I still it doesn't make me feel any better. Like I still should have beat him. He shouldn't have placed that year. But
And that was the last match you ever wrestled officially.
yeah, it is.
That's such a. I feel like my coaches didn't stress that enough, but I think that's almost an important lesson to like bring up front to athletes. Like 99% of people, their last game, their last match is a loss.
Yeah.
Like, how awful sounding is that?
And then you have to think about that for the rest of your life.
Yep. Yep. I remember my last match. So I asked you about if you had a rival. I had a rival my senior
Oh yeah.
year. Giovanni or something like that was his name. I don't know. He wasn't even like against my rival high school, but he was around the area. And I wrestled him until like 3 or 4 times in the same year. And it got closer and closer every single time. But and the way it worked in Illinois was it went regional, sectional, state. And you needed third in regionals, you needed fourth in sectionals to get to, third in regionals to get to sectionals, fourth in sectionals to get to state. And my classification, I think, was we had the biggest population. I think it was like single A, double A, triple A, if I remember correctly. And so biggest population meaning more schools, more talent, harder competition. Triple A was always harder than double A and harder than single A. So I finally meet this guy in the third place match, and you need third to go on. And this is my third, fourth time wrestling this guy in the same year. And I'm not sure. This is the point, like in my head, like, man, my blood sugar was on point. Maybe it could have been different.
Mm-hmm.
It wasn't exciting as like what you were telling me, what your story was like. Oh, you got the takedown. You never do takedowns. Everyone's going hog wild or corn wild, as maybe they would have said in Nebraska. And then you went for the waist opposed to the ankle, and you got the reversal. But I was not. I was kind of. I wasn't fast, but I wasn't super strong. But I like to slow people down and wrestle like a heavyweight, even though I wasn't. I was wrestling. Senior year, I wrestled 152. And I remember trying to do other shots I'd never have done before. And this guy just was stalling on me like crazy. And I think I was taking so many shots. I think I can't remember how they got to the score, but it was like 2-1. And it was like 30 seconds left, third period, 2-1. I literally just need anything. And he's like dead tired. He's not caring. He's just defending and just went like slapping his way to victory. And I'm like freaking pissed because I know this is my last match ever. And I am shooting, I'm trying so many things, and I end up not getting it, I think. And I lost 2-1. And I remember that being such a heartbreak because before I think I lost like, I don't know, like 4-1, and then like something like he blew me out of the water like 7-2 or 10-2 or something like that. Like he got closer every time I wrestled him. But to lose 2-1, get fourth in regionals, not make it to sectionals or state, and I remember that being but I had so many parts of my character not developed yet at that point. I had a lot of seeds, but a lot of my ability to will things into existence didn't come till I got to college.
Yeah.
And so, but I remember then that loss, you shake hands, you shake the coach's hand. And I just remember like going and sitting down in between these bleachers. I mean, regional is still going on and just feel like and just bawling my eyes out as the last match I ever wrestled. And I lost to my rival. And man, that was a hard moment for sure. Um, and
Yeah.
so
Like that last, when it's done and it's done, it's so hard. Like my whole family was there, like
yeah.
extended family and everybody was there
Mm-hmm.
watching. And it's like, man, they came all this way for me to not even place. And
Mm-hmm.
then like, so I couldn't even go up and face them like afterwards. And I just like stayed down because like it was in the arena. So like I just stayed down below. And I'm like I didn't cry when it was over, but like I knew once I like saw my dad's face, I was just gonna lose it. Cause like for the most part, like I always wanted to wrestle to make them proud because they were always there every match. And so like going up and facing them, I'm like, and man, this is tough.
Mm-hmm. Yeah. So you made it to, was that your only time you made it to state, or did you make a state time before that too?
No, so that was my senior year. But I did make it to state my junior year as well.
Gotcha.
Yeah, my junior year, making it to state. So at districts, we just have districts. We don't have sectionals and then
Mm-hmm.
districts or whatever. And so it's a 16-man bracket, and you have to place fourth. And so in that one, so in the district tournament, I'm in the heartbreak round, and I'm wrestling our rival school. And so I mean, it's just everybody like because both of our schools are like not only are we rivals, but we're also real big into wrestling, both of our schools. And so there's a lot of fans from our school and there's a lot of fans from the other school. And so it's real intense. And of course, there's a lot of these matches happening because a lot of both of our teams are pretty good. And so a lot of us match up. And so anyways, we get to going and we get into overtime. And again, like I said, I was a defensive wrestler, so I don't think I hardly shot at all in the overtime round. So then we go into the ride outs, and we ride both of us either get away or ride out. No, I think we both got away. And so then
Yeah, because you take
um,
turns, right?
yeah, you take turns. And so
That's a
one
quick.
person's on bottom, one person's on top, and um, you both get a turn. But if you get out, um, then you
Right.
get a point. Then the other person gets a chance, um, and vice versa. So if
Right.
you don't get out, and you only get 30 seconds,
Yeah, that's right.
and so we both got out, but he barely got out at the end. And so then we go to like the sudden death, like the final ride out.
Yeah, the
So
toss a
it's 30
coin.
seconds. If he doesn't get away, you win. If he gets away, he wins.
Right.
And so I had choice because I had scored first. And so I chose top because I'm like, he barely got away. I think I can hold him. And
Oh man,
my
that was always such a hard decision.
yeah,
I'm gonna just I've lost in triple overtime. I don't know how many times by making the wrong call.
yeah.
But go on.
Yeah, like because I was always better on the mat. That's why I was a defensive wrestler on my feet because I was much better on the mat, whether it was bottom or top. But I would say I was even better on top than I was on bottom. And so I'm like, let's just do my thing and let's just go with the top. And so like it is like the most intense 30 seconds that I've ever been a part of because like he got to his feet so many times and like my fingers are just
Yeah.
like almost separated and then I'd lift him and return him, or
Nice.
take him down. And I remember like the final seconds, like literally my fingers are like
Yep.
about ready to break, and then the whistle blows, and I ended up winning the match and moving on. But it was,
Yeah.
yep, it was super intense. Everybody was so excited. I feel sorry for my parents in that moment because that's got to be really stressful. It's like the most stressful thing when you have no control over the situation, and so you
Mhm.
just have to like cheer and scream your head
Yeah.
off. But yeah, it was a pretty cool moment.
Nice. Nice. Oh, yeah. I wasn't overall. I was not that good a wrestler. I was. I think my senior year, I barely broke 500 on my
Mm.
record. So, uh, looking back at the will that I have now, and to train, it'd be interesting to see what I could do with the type of mindset I have now, if back then. But that's all part of the journey, right?
Hmm.
I don't regret those things. But this is something that you and I have never done. The Diabuddies have never had a wrestling match,
I know. Next
and
time you
it's
come back, we might have to find a mat,
yeah,
film it.
is what film it. I don't want to embarrass you
Oh, okay.
in front of people there. Am I heavier than you right now?
I don't know how much you weigh.
Like around 185 to 190, 192
Yeah, no,
sometimes.
I'm like I haven't weighed in a really long time, but I usually sit around 195, 190.
Wow. Well, well,
So we're pretty close.
we are. It'll have it'll happen. It'll have to
Yeah.
happen. But wow. So there's just so many things, looking back at the challenges of a wrestler. And I think push comes to shove for me, it was realizing now, looking back, how much more I could have performed as an athlete if I had the guidance to take care of my blood sugar, notice patterns, get my blood sugar in control, even if it was only just for the performance, just for the meet match. That's probably the biggest thing for me looking back at all of this. And I hope that if whether you wrestle or your sprint track or whatever it is, I hope you can turn some lessons into some of these things and just do a little bit better.
Yep. Yeah, it's like again, getting that data, you're not going to be good. You're not going to be perfect. You're definitely not going to be probably very good at it the first time. But you just have to live and learn. And the best way you can do that is getting data, getting as much information as you can, so that way you can make the best decisions that you can. And so, if you're struggling with a certain part of the process with whatever sport it is or whatever you're doing, then get more data on that situation, and then use that data to say, okay, I need to do this, or maybe I should do this, and that might help with that. So like it was interesting going and doing that jiu-jitsu tournament after having not done much of any competition, especially like one-on-one competition. It's much different doing one-on-one competition versus doing like a team sport, because like team sport, yeah, you get a little nervous for maybe like right before the game or something like that. But for me, like the spike in blood sugar, way different than um
Mm-hmm.
for a individual sport versus a team sport, because it's just like
Mm-hmm.
all eyes are on you. It's mano a mano, like especially with wrestling, it's like who is the better man, and it's like very much a pride thing to be like, yes, I was dominant over this person. And so like it was very interesting going back and doing that jiu-jitsu tournament, because knowing what I know now and trying to understand those things, it's like even with the amount of knowledge that I had, I just didn't have that much data because I hadn't done it while I was doing wrestling. And so, man, it was like a nightmare trying to get my blood sugar under control. But it ended up working out pretty well for me because I didn't understand how jiu-jitsu tournaments worked. And so I thought it was like a wrestling tournament where you basically wrestle through all the weight classes, go back, and then wrestle your next match, or do your next match. No, in jiu-jitsu, it is you wrestle, or you um fight, I think is what they call it, but you fight all your matches, and then they move on to the next bracket. So like in our bracket, we had 3 people. And so I had the first match with one kid. And then since I won, the other 2 uh, wrestled or fought. And so I got a little bit of a break, but then I had to go back in right after that and
Right.
wrestle and go to the next one. And so that in and of itself was just super weird to me. But at the same time, it ended up working out because I'm like, okay, I'm going to be going here pretty soon. And so I was getting nervous already. And so my blood sugar was spiking. And so I saw that it was spiking. It was already high. And I'm like, it's only going to go higher at this point. So I took like a ton of insulin, like more than I probably should have. It was kind of like, this is probably way too much. And I'm going to end up crashing right when I need to actually
Like
go.
5 plus, 8
Oh,
plus?
yeah, 5 plus for sure.
Oh, wow.
It was probably like 7, maybe even up to 10. I don't know.
Holy cow.
Yeah. And because I'm just like, because I thought I was going to be going soon. So I'm like, I want to drive this sucker down fast. And so it ended up working out perfectly to where it came down right as I was going out. And so my blood sugar was perfect. So it's like, it was like a disaster, but at the same time, somehow it worked out really well for me.
Solid. Wow. So collect data, learn, trial and error, and realize that it can drastically affect your practices, your performance, and it's not something just to go with the flow. It's not something, as much as possible. But we're all diabetic. We're all human. It's okay to make mistakes.
Yep.
So as people in my wrestling room would say, there's no such thing as a free lunch. So work fucking hard and get after it.
Amen to that.
Mm-hmm. Well, thanks everyone for listening to a little more rough around the edges of the Diabetes podcast and the first episode of or tangent of Bottoms Up, right?
Boxes up.
Boxes up.
Juice boxes, son. Come on.
I texted you bottoms up. I was just confirming as you were talking. I said bottoms up. You didn't correct me. So, all right, boxes up. Thank you for listening to the first segment of Boxes Up, everyone. And we'll catch you next time on the Diabetes podcast.
See ya.
Thank you so much for listening to today's episode. If you found value in today's conversation, we would appreciate it if you gave a 5-star review. It really helps us branch out our community and get our message across to those who really need to hear it. If you want to interact with us on social media, you can follow us on the Diabetes podcast on Facebook, Twitter, and Instagram. Or if you have any questions, comments, concerns, or moral outrages, you can email us at thediabetiespodcast@gmail.com. Thanks.